welcome to Griffonomics.
Thank you. It's great to be here for this one.
Yeah, today we are setting out on a mission, really. Think of this as an investigative report into what is, without exaggeration, the most massive systemic shift in the United States defense industry since the start of the Cold War.
Absolutely.
We're tracking a fundamental structural pivot. For decades, the Pentagon has worshipped at the altar of what military insiders call exquisite platforms. But right now, we're watching a complete upending of that doctrine, moving toward a radically different philosophy known as a tradable mass.
Right, a tradable mass.
And I want to welcome you, the listener, right at the top, because whether you're a defense industry insider tracking procurement cycles or an investor looking at where the massive capital flows are shifting, or just someone insanely curious about how the actual physical future of global security is being built, this deep dive is custom-tailored exactly for you.
It really is.
We're going to look under the hood of an industry that is quite literally rebuilding itself in real time. And we have an enormous, incredibly dense stack of sources to get through today.
We certainly do. And the sheer volume of data we're synthesizing today is staggering. The stack in front of us isn't just one type of document. We are pulling from the latest financial earnings transcripts of publicly traded defense contractors, internal Pentagon memos that detail procurement strategy, deep dive defense industry articles, and highly technical YouTube analysis that track the intersection of military strategy, engineering, and financial markets.
Yeah, it's a massive variety of data.
But before we go a single step further, we have to establish some crucial context and provide a mandatory disclaimer for you. The sources we are analyzing today reference very specific, highly recognizable political figures.
Like President Trump.
Exactly, President Trump and the recently appointed Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. The documents also cover politically charged directives, most notably the Unleashing American Drone Dominance Executive Order. So it is absolutely essential to emphasize clearly to you that neither of us here is taking a political side. We are not endorsing any of the viewpoints, policies, or individuals mentioned in these sources.
Not at all.
Our mission today is strictly and impartially to analyze the factual business, military, and economic shifts that are documented in this source material. We are looking at the math, the manufacturing reality, and the military doctrine, nothing else.
I'm really glad we set those guardrails, because the data itself is dramatic enough without any political spin. Okay, let's unpack this. What the data points to unequivocally is a crisis of scale. The United States is facing an unprecedented challenge in how it actually physically builds the tools of national defense.
Crisis of scale is the perfect phrase. Fundamentally, what we're talking about is something analysts in these sources refer to as the cost curve war. The entire defense establishment has woken up to a terrifying realization.
Which is?
That they are losing the fundamental economic math of modern conflict.
I was reading through the analyst's notes from the financial firm Stifel on this exact point, and they used a historical analogy that made me stop and reread it 3 times. They're calling this current landscape the defense sector's 1935 moment.
It's a brilliant historical parallel. It captures the impending velocity of the budget shift perfectly.
How so?
Well, think about manned aviation in 1935. At that time, you had biplanes and early monoplanes, things like the Boeing P-26. They were interesting. They had some utility for reconnaissance or limited tactical strikes, but manned aircraft represented a nearly negligible portion of the total global military budget.
Right, because everyone was still building huge ships.
Exactly. The major powers were still investing heavily in battleships and massive infantry divisions. Manned aviation was an auxiliary capability, just a tiny fraction of the pie.
Okay.
But the geopolitical and technological landscape was shifting beneath their feet. Fast forward just 20 years to 1955. You're in the era of the B-52 bomber and supersonic jet fighters. Air power, manned aircraft consumed over half of the military's entire investment account.
Over half.
Wow.
Over half.
In 2 decades, it moved from a niche experimental curiosity to the absolute undeniable core of global force structure. The analysts at Stifel and the Pentagon planners cited across our memos see the exact same inevitable explosive trajectory for unmanned systems and autonomous drones today.
So to translate that for you, the listener, especially if you're tracking the economics or looking at defense portfolios, we are not talking about a gradual, comfortable 3 or 4% year-over-year increase in defense spending for a few tech companies. We're looking at an exponential mandatory replatforming of the entire defense budget.
Yes.
The money is moving in a tectonic shift, And the philosophy driving that money is the transition from exquisite platforms to attritable mass.
And this entire pivot is a total rejection of the exquisite platform.
Break that down a bit. Exquisite platform.
For decades, the entire budget was swallowed by these billion-dollar delicate systems. Think of a Ford-class aircraft carrier. It costs roughly $13 billion to build, takes years to construct, and houses over 4,000 sailors.
Or a B-2 stealth bomber, right? Pushing $2 billion per tail.
Exactly. They are technological marvels, but they are exquisite, meaning if you lose just one of them in combat, it is a national headline. It's a tragedy. It alters the geopolitical map and forces a massive strategic retreat.
You literally can't afford to lose a single one.
Right. When a platform is that exquisite, you become terrified to actually use it. You don't park a $13 billion aircraft carrier near a hostile coast if you know the adversary has a $2 million hypersonic missile that can sink it.
So you park it far away.
You park it 1,000 miles away, which means the planes it carries might not even have the fuel range to reach the target. The exquisite nature of the platform defeats its own tactical purpose.
That makes a lot of sense.
Contrast that with attritable mass, which the military sometimes calls volume warfare.
Attritable, that's a very specific word.
It's a polite defense term for expendable. It means creating low-cost, highly capable systems that can be deployed in overwhelming numbers. The underlying philosophy dictates that the loss of an individual drone, or even 100 drones, should be merely a tactical reality.
It should make the evening news.
Exactly, you expect to lose them. They are designed to be a sponge for enemy air defenses, absorbing missiles and lasers while still delivering a lethal blow through sheer overwhelming volume.
I was struck by an analogy in one of the Pentagon memos. They talked about a strategic accountant running the war. Because when you strip away the ideology, the cost curve war is just pure corporate finance applied to ballistics.
That's entirely what it is.
Let's run the math on a typical engagement over the last few years. Let's say an adversary launches a Shahed-style drone at a critical infrastructure target or a naval vessel. That drone costs them maybe $20,000 to manufacture. It's built with commercial moped engines and cheap electronics. To shoot it down, the U.S. and its allies have routinely been firing Patriot interceptor missiles or advanced naval SM-2 missiles. Those interceptors cost anywhere from $1 million to well over $2 million.
Per shot.
Every single time you push the button.
And if you run that math out over a 30-day conflict where an adversary is launching hundreds of these cheap drones a day, defense analysts in the source material calculate that the defensive spend ratio is roughly $20 to $28 for every single dollar the adversary invests in their offense.
That's brutal.
That asymmetry breaks the back of a nation's treasury. You can have a perfect track record, you can win every single tactical engagement, shoot down every single incoming drone, and you will still completely bankrupt your own country doing it.
You literally spend yourself into defeat. The adversary doesn't even need the drone to hit the target. Just forcing you to fire the $2 million interceptor is a massive victory for them.
Precisely. The goal of the cheap drone isn't necessarily kinetic destruction, it's financial exhaustion, which is why the Department of War is executing a complete cultural and industrial overhaul.
I saw a great comparison in the sources about this overhaul. They described the traditional defense industry as a Formula One racing team.
Yes. A Formula One team builds incredibly expensive, highly customized, exquisite vehicles in very low volumes. They are the best in the world, but they take months to build one car, and if it crashes, it's a complete disaster.
Yes, so what's the new model?
The new mandate is to become a Toyota factory. They need standardized, highly reliable, deeply affordable, mass-produced vehicles that can roll off an assembly line by the thousands. They are moving away from bespoke perfection toward practical expendability. They want Six Sigma efficiency applied to lethal drones.
But wanting a Toyota factory and actually building one are two very different things. I mean, the government has tried to overhaul procurement before and failed miserably.
Anytime.
But the data shows they're trying an entirely new mechanism this time. The $1.1 billion Drone Dominance Program, or the DDP. This program is funded by what the sources affectionately refer to as the Big, Beautiful Bill.
Right.
And the sheer scale of the ambition here is what caught my eye. We are not talking about the Pentagon buying a few hundred prototypes to test in a lab for 5 years.
No, not at all.
The explicit procurement goal of the DDP is to field approximately 340,000 small, one-way attack drones by the year 2028.
Just pause and consider the logistics of that number for a second. 340,000 lethal autonomous systems in just 2 years. That volume is almost incomprehensible by traditional aerospace standards.
It's staggering.
You are talking about thousands of shipping containers, massive supply chains for raw materials like carbon fiber and rare earth metals for magnets, and the sheer warehousing footprint required before they are even deployed to units.
How do they even move that fast?
To achieve that kind of speed, the military realized they had to completely bypass the traditional defense acquisition system. The old system, known as JCID, is ancient. It takes a decade to get from a concept on a whiteboard to a fielded weapon.
By the time a drone survives a 10-year procurement cycle, its technology is completely obsolete anyway.
Exactly. So to fix this, the DDP utilizes a highly aggressive, rapid-fire competition model called the Gauntlet.
The Gauntlet, it sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. But the details from Gauntlet I, which took place at Fort Moore, formerly Fort Benning, are incredible.
What happened there?
Well, the Pentagon invited 25 different commercial vendors, and they didn't want PowerPoint presentations. They said, bring your small attack drones to the base for a live-fire evaluation.
A physical fly-off.
Yes, but here's where the paradigm completely shifts. The people evaluating these systems weren't engineers with clipboards from a defense prime. They weren't generals in a conference room. The drones were evaluated by approximately 100 actual enlisted service members from the Army, Marine Corps, and Special Operations.
And the most vital detail in that entire exercise, those soldiers received only 2 hours of training per drone system.
2 hours. I've spent more time trying to figure out the settings on a new smart TV.
That is exactly the point. Historically, the military would send a soldier to a school for 6 months just to learn how to operate a specific radio system.
Right.
The new mandate demands the intuitive simplicity of a consumer smartphone applied to a lethal weapons system. If a 19-year-old Marine cannot learn how to pull your drone out of a backpack, pair it to a tablet, fly it, and strike a target 10 kilometers away after just a 2-hour tutorial, the military does not want your product.
It is the ultimate test of user-centric design.
It really is. The Pentagon didn't use a 100-page requirements document to judge the winners. At the end of the 2 hours, they simply asked the soldier who flew the drone a single binary question.
Would you take this to war?
Exactly. Would you take this to war? If the answer was yes, the company advanced.
And we have the actual leaderboard from Phase 1 that just dropped in early March. The Pentagon selected a top 11 to receive the first batch of orders. At the absolute top of the pack, dominating the competition, was a company called Skycutter.
Skycutter did incredibly well.
They achieved a near-perfect score of 99.3 out of 100. That is an incredible margin of victory when you're dealing with live-fire variables in the mud.
Yes.
They were followed by Nero's at 87.5 and Napatri Technology at 80.3. But as I looked down the list, one name really jumped out at me.
Who was that?
Placing sixth, with a score of 72.9, was a company named Ukrainian Defense Drones, or UDD.
Ah, yes. And their presence on that leaderboard is highly strategic. It fulfills a commitment the Pentagon made to integrate battle-tested, iteration-heavy Ukrainian innovation directly into the domestic U.S. manufacturing base.
Why is that iteration speed so important to them?
The sources note a fascinating dynamic. In Ukraine, drone companies are iterating on their designs every 2 weeks. Every 14 days, they push a hardware or software update based on real-world combat feedback.
That's incredibly fast.
It's usually because Russian electronic warfare tactics have adapted, and the drones need a new frequency hopping algorithm or a new antenna to survive. The U.S. military is terrified of their own sluggishness. They want that 2-week iteration speed injected into our domestic system.
And they are backing it up with serious cash to incentivize that speed, but with a major catch-ruthless cost compression.
Very ruthless.
The initial order that the Pentagon is placing right now is for 30,000 drones split among those top 11 vendors, totaling $150 million. If you do the math, that prices them at exactly $5,000 each for this first phase.
$5,000 is practically free by historical Pentagon standards. But it's not cheap enough to win the cost curve war.
Not even close.
This stated goal of the DDP, as it progresses through 4 gauntlet phases over the next 2 years, is to force the commercial market to drop that unit price significantly.
What's the target?
The target for the upcoming phases is to compress the cost below $2,300, and eventually the Pentagon wants to pay less than $2,000 per kamikaze drone.
I had to read that specific line item 3 times to make sure I wasn't dropping a zero. They want a lethal military-grade weapon with autonomous targeting capabilities for the price of a MacBook Pro.
Yes.
Is that even physically possible?
It is, but it requires stripping out everything that isn't absolutely necessary for the terminal phase of the flight.
Right.
It means removing redundant sensors, using mass-produced plastic injection molding instead of carbon fiber, and utilizing commercial off-the-shelf components. The Pentagon is using the promise of massive volume, the guarantee that they will buy hundreds of thousands of units, to force these companies to optimize their supply chains and strip out every single cent of excess cost.
But producing 340,000 drones is really only half the battle, right? Because if the military culture won't let a private actually touch the controller, the hardware is totally useless.
That is the biggest bottleneck.
You can buy all the $2,000 drones you want, but if they just sit in a Pelican case in a supply room, you haven't changed the battlefield at all. Which brings us to what the sources highlight as a massive regulatory and bureaucratic reset.
This is a huge shift.
Secretary of War Pete Hegseth executed a policy shift that fundamentally changes what a drone actually is in the eyes of the military. He reclassified small drones from durable property to consumable commodities.
To a civilian, changing a label from durable to consumable sounds like meaningless bureaucratic shuffling. But within the military, that label completely dictates human behavior. Historically, if a drone was labeled durable property, it was accounted for exactly like a Humvee or a highly expensive secure radio or night vision goggles.
Okay.
If a soldier was running a training exercise and accidentally crashed a small drone into a tree, or the battery died and it plummeted into a river, it triggered what is known as a FLIF PL.
Oh, a FLIF. What is that?
It stands for a financial liability investigation of property loss. It is a massive, lengthy, stressful investigation. Soldiers, and specifically the young officers commanding them, were terrified of the paperwork, the potential disciplinary action, and the threat of having their pay docked for destroying government property.
Wow, it's the classic military trap.
Yeah.
You have this cutting-edge gear, but you're too afraid of the quartermaster to actually practice with it.
Yeah.
So the drones stayed in their boxes.
Exactly. So Hegseth's directive says, no more. These are consumable commodities. Drones are now officially classified as ammunition.
Just like bullets.
Yes, you are supposed to use them. You're supposed to crash them into targets. You are supposed to expend them in training, just like you fire 5.56 millimeter bullets at a target range and don't expect to pick the brass up and account for every casing.
That makes a ton of sense.
The entire goal is to demystify the technology. By treating them like bullets, the Pentagon is ensuring that a drone is placed in the hands of every single Army squad by the end of fiscal year 2026.
But getting them into the hands of the squad requires a completely new purchasing mechanism. You can't use the old 10-year system to buy consumables. The sources detail the evolution of something called the Blue List.
Right, the Blue List.
Historically, the Blue List was managed by the Defense Innovation Unit, or DIU. It was essentially a roster of vetted, secure, non-Chinese drones that government agencies were allowed to buy. But it was still a cumbersome, multi-step process. Recently, control of the Blue List was aggressively transitioned from the DIU to the Defense Contract Management Agency, the DCMA.
The sources describe this new DCMA-managed system as a vetted Amazon for the military. The military is trying to transition from a slow, traditional procurement system to a secure e-commerce model.
E-commerce for weapons.
Exactly. Under these new directives, unit commanders on the ground are essentially handed a corporate credit card. If an infantry captain realizes his unit needs a specific type of NDAA-compliant quadcopter for an upcoming deployment, or even just replacement parts like a new brushless motor or a set of propellers, he doesn't have to route a request through 5 levels of Pentagon bureaucracy and wait 18 months.
So what does he do?
He logs onto the Blue List portal, selects the vetted equipment, and clicks checkout.
And the timeline they're aiming for is wild. The stated goal is a 48-hour procurement turnaround. From a need identified in the mud by the unit commander to a box shipping out of a logistics hub in 2 days. That is light speed for the government.
It is. But when you move that fast and you push lethal advanced technology down to the lowest tactical levels across multiple government agencies, you are guaranteed to experience severe growing pains.
Yeah.
The technology is arriving faster than the regulatory and operational frameworks can handle.
The sources highlight a very specific incident in El Paso, Texas, that perfectly illustrates the friction of this new reality. It's actually somewhat terrifying when you think about the implications.
The low CUST incident.
Yeah. Customs and Border Patrol officers were utilizing a highly advanced Army anti-drone laser system known as OCES. It was loaned to them to test on the border. The officers spotted what they believed was a cartel surveillance drone operating near the border. So they had a new laser, they saw a drone, and they took the shot.
But firing a military-grade directed energy weapon into domestic airspace without absolute perfect coordination with civilian aviation authorities is a recipe for disaster. Because of that laser discharge, the airspace over El Paso had to be abruptly shut down by the FAA.
Oh, man.
It perfectly captures the Wild West environment we are in right now. You have Border Patrol agents using directed energy weapons on domestic soil to shoot down autonomous cartel drones, causing civilian air traffic control to hit the panic button.
The hardware is completely outpacing the rules of engagement, which makes looking at the companies building this hardware so fascinating. We really need to dive into the specific disruptors that are arming this new reality.
Let's do it.
Let's look at Kratos Defense, ticker KTOS, and Ondas Holdings, ticker ONDS. Let's start with Kratos. If you're an investor and you look closely at the Gauntlet Eye leaderboard we discussed earlier, you might have noticed a glaring omission. Kratos, which is arguably one of the most famous names in military drones, did not make the top 11 for that small quadcopter competition.
Right.
At first glance, you might think they're losing their edge.
But you have to look deeper at their specific strategic positioning. Kratos didn't win the small quadcopter gauntlet because that isn't their game. They aren't trying to build a $2,000 plastic suicide drone. Their focus is on dominating what the military calls heavy attritable mass. They are building systems like the XQ-58 Valkyrie.
And the Valkyrie is a monster compared to a quadcopter. It is a stealthy, jet-powered drone roughly 30 feet long.
Yeah.
It's capable of high subsonic speeds, and it has internal weapons bays to drop guided munitions.
Very capable.
It's designed to fly autonomously as a loyal wingman alongside exquisite manned fighters like the F-35, taking on the most dangerous tasks like jamming radars or absorbing anti-aircraft fire. But crucially, it costs between $5 million and $10 million per unit.
Right.
Now, to the average person, $10 million is a staggering amount of money. How does a $10 million jet fit into the concept of attritable or expendable mass?
Well, it is all relative to the exquisite platform it is protecting. In the world of fighter jets, a single F-35 costs over $100 million to build. And more importantly, the human pilot sitting inside it requires millions of dollars and years of training to replace.
Yeah, you can't just print a new pilot.
If you lose the F-35 and the pilot, it's a massive strategic blow. If you send a $10 million Valkyrie jet drone ahead of the F-35 to destroy a surface-to-air missile site, and the Valkyrie gets shot down in the process, that is an entirely acceptable trade.
So it is attritable.
Yes. It is a rounding error in the grand scheme of an air campaign.
And Kratos is actively scaling up production to meet this demand. They are moving from building just 8 Valkyrie aircraft by hand per year to a target of 40 aircraft annually on a synchronized production line by 2028.
That's a huge jump.
But building that kind of heavy industrial capacity requires a tremendous amount of capital, which is why Kratos executed a massive financial maneuver recently. They raised $1.17 billion in cold, hard cash through a stock offering.
A very strategic move.
Now, if I'm a shareholder, raising $1 billion by issuing new stock heavily dilutes my shares. It makes my slice of the pie smaller, which usually makes Wall Street very angry. Why take the pain of dilution right now?
They did it to secure a fortress balance sheet. Kratos now has zero long-term debt. They are using that massive war chest for 2 critical strategic imperatives. First, they are building their own physical factories, like their new Prometheus facility, which is dedicated entirely to building solid rocket motors.
So they're bringing it in-house.
They are vertically integrating so they don't have to wait in line behind Boeing and Lockheed for propulsion systems. Second, and most importantly, they are using that cash to urgently secure non-Chinese supply chains.
That is massive.
They're looking down the road, seeing the geopolitical friction, and buying their way out of the supply chain vulnerability that plagues the rest of the industry. They are locking in domestic or allied suppliers for critical components at premium prices, using that cash to guarantee their production lines won't halt if an embargo hits.
That strategic foresight is what separates a long-term survivor from a flash-in-the-pan startup. Which brings us to our second disruptor, Ondas Holdings. Ondas is executing what analysts are calling the neoprime strategy.
The neoprime.
Let's break down what a neoprime actually is. Traditionally, the defense sector was bifurcated. You had massive legacy primes like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, or General Dynamics. They are huge, slow, heavily bureaucratic, but they have the immense financial endurance required to survive decades-long procurement cycles.
Right, they can wait it out.
On the other end of the spectrum, you have agile Silicon Valley startups. They move incredibly fast, iterate software in days, but they often go bankrupt, navigating the Pentagon's valley of death.
That brutal multi-year period between building a cool prototype and actually securing a massive funded production contract?
Exactly. A neoprime is the synthesis of both. It is a company that maintains the aggressive, software-first speed of a startup, but possesses the massive cash balance sheet of a legacy defense contractor.
And Ondas has aggressively built exactly that structure. They are sitting on a staggering $1.5 billion cash fortress. This money isn't just for R&D. It serves a very specific psychological purpose for the Department of War.
But it's illogical. How so?
It proves longevity confidence. It proves that Ondas isn't going to run out of venture capital money next year and close up shop. The military can safely sign a 10-year sustainment contract with them, knowing the company has the balance sheet to exist a decade from now.
But wait, defense roll-ups have a terrible track record. Historically, companies buy up a bunch of smaller defense tech firms, mash them together, and it becomes a bloated conglomerate where the tech doesn't actually integrate. What makes Ondas's approach to this any different?
What makes Ondas different is that they aren't just buying random revenue streams. They are buying the specific components of a system of systems. They went on an acquisition spree to own every single piece of the autonomous kill chain and the defensive shield.
Give me an example of the pieces.
First, they bought American Robotics and their Optimus system. This is an FAA-certified drone in a box. It wakes itself up, opens the box, flies a perimeter patrol, uses computer vision to look for anomalies, and lands itself to recharge without a human pilot ever touching a joystick.
Then they acquired RoboTeam, which builds unmanned ground vehicles, right? Small, rugged robots used for bomb disposal or clearing tunnels.
Yes, but again, the value is integration. If the Optimus drone in the sky detects a threat, it can automatically cue the RoboTeam ground robot to investigate the specific coordinates completely autonomously.
And then there is the logistics piece, which is often ignored by Silicon Valley startups. Ondas bought Rotron Aero.
That's a great example. Why buy a UK-based drone propulsion company? Because Rotron builds drone engines that run on military-grade heavy JP-8 fuel, essentially kerosene.
Why does that matter so much?
If you are a logistics officer in a desert combat zone, the absolute last thing you want is a pallet of highly sensitive lithium-ion batteries degrading in 110-degree heat, posing a fire risk, and requiring massive charging infrastructure. You want a drone that drinks the exact same JP-8 fuel you are already pumping into your Humvees, tanks, and generators.
It simplifies the global logistics tale immensely. They also address the defensive side of the equation counter-UAS with two more acquisitions, Centrix and Iron Drone.
Let's talk about Centrix first. Centrix provides the soft kill. It uses cyber technology and radio frequency manipulation to essentially hack an incoming hostile drone. It takes control of the enemy drone's navigation and forces it to land safely.
This is vital for defending critical infrastructure, or say, a packed civilian stadium, where you absolutely cannot afford to have a destroyed, explosive-laden drone falling out of the sky into a crowd.
But soft kills don't always work. If you are facing a massive swarm of autonomous suicide drones that are operating on pre-programmed optical targeting and aren't listening to radio signals, hacking them is impossible. You need the hard kill.
That is Iron Drone. Iron Drone is a kinetic interceptor. It launches from a pod, flies at astonishing speed toward the incoming threat, and literally fires a net to entangle the enemy drone's rotors, instantly deploying a parachute to bring them both down safely.
And the beauty of the neoprime model is the turnkey aspect. Ondas can walk into the Pentagon or the Department of Homeland Security and offer this entire integrated stack.
And we are seeing this strategy yield massive results. They are positioned as the prime contractor for Project Hives, which is a contract worth over $100 million.
Right.
They are deploying these autonomous drone-in-a-box swarms for border security. And crucially, the sources note they are reselling Rekor's advanced computer vision technology as part of this package.
Rekor's AI is powerful.
They use it to process the optical feeds from the drones, instantly identifying whether a vehicle crossing the border is a cartel truck or a lost civilian, alerting the Border Patrol autonomously.
And to handle the mass production required for these massive contracts, like producing their WASP drone for the Drone Dominance program, Ondas isn't trying to build their own massive factories from scratch and learn heavy manufacturing on the fly.
What are they doing instead?
They are outsourcing that to established experts. They partnered with Kitron, a major contract manufacturer, to build up to 20,000 WASP drones a month.
20,000 units a month. That is the Neoprime model fully realized. Startup software speed, a massive cash balance sheet, and outsourced industrial scale.
That's right.
Which brings us to a company that took a completely different and arguably much riskier approach to owning the kill chain. Let's look at AeroVironment, ticker AVAV. We call this the integration gamble.
Yes, AVAV.
AeroVironment is a legendary name in the drone industry. They have an undisputed lead in the kinetic space, specifically with their Switchblade loitering munitions.
Those are the tube-launched kamikaze drones that have been proven time and time again on battlefields in Ukraine and the Middle East.
Right. They pop out of a tube, pop their wings, loiter over a battlefield until the operator identifies the target, and then dive bomb it.
Their backlog is staggering. They are sitting on $1.1 billion in funded orders. They just secured a fresh $186 million order from the Army just for more Switchblades.
And to meet this insatiable demand, they are building a massive, highly automated manufacturing facility in Utah that will be capable of producing $2 billion worth of Switchblades annually. They are the undisputed king of the kinetic kill.
But management realized that simply being the manufacturer of the kinetic weapon wasn't enough to survive the next evolution of warfare. Building the drone is a commodity business eventually. They wanted to own the entire architecture.
The software, the space communications, the laser defenses that guide the weapon.
Exactly. To achieve this, AeroVironment took an existential gamble. They spent $4.1 billion to acquire a company called Blue Halo.
$4.1 billion. It completely transformed the company overnight. But here is the massive crisis. If you are analyzing their financial risk profile, you have to understand the SCAR implosion.
The SCAR implosion. Let's break that down.
What is SCAR? SCAR is a massive $1.4 billion contract that belonged to Blue Halo prior to the acquisition. The goal of the program is to replace the Space Force's old, massive, physically rotating satellite dishes with flat, solid-state phased array antennas that track satellites electronically using software.
It is critical, highly complex national security infrastructure.
However, the sources reveal that the Space Force just issued a stop work order on Blue Halo's $1.4 billion SCAR contract. They halted the program.
And the financial mechanics of why they halted it are absolutely brutal for AeroVironment. The government has decided to shift the contract structure from a flexible R&D style agreement to a firm fixed price structure.
Let's do a deep dive into the corporate finance of this, because firm fixed price is a terrifying phrase for a defense contractor right now.
It really is. Under the old traditional cost-plus contract model, the government essentially writes a blank check. They pay for all your research, all your materials, the thousands of hours of engineering time, and then they guarantee you a set profit margin on top of whatever you spent.
So if inflation hits, or the technology proves 10 times harder to build than expected, the government simply writes a bigger check. You, the company, take zero financial risk.
But under a firm fixed price contract, the government fundamentally changes the dynamic. They say, we will pay you exactly X dollars to deliver this phased array antenna system, period.
Wow.
If the cost of raw materials spikes, or if the hardware design is immature and requires massive, expensive redesigns on the factory floor, the government does not care. The company has to eat every single penny of those extra costs. It completely destroys your profit margins and can even result in the company taking massive losses on every unit they ship.
And AeroVironment management looked at the incredibly complex, immature hardware they had just acquired with Blue Halo, looked at the firm fixed price mandate from the Space Force, and realized they were walking into a buzzsaw.
A buzzsaw is a good way to put it.
If they tried to mass produce those advanced antennas at a fixed price, they would bleed cash on every single unit. So they are locked in a standoff. This single contract recompetition threatens 50% of AeroVironment's entire funded backlog.
It is a massive execution risk that has analysts seriously questioning if they drastically overpaid for the $4.1 billion Blue Halo acquisition. It's a cautionary tale of defense M&A. You might buy a great tech company, but if the Pentagon changes the billing structure, your valuation collapses.
It perfectly illustrates the harsh reality of the Pentagon's new re-optimization strategy. The government is signaling the end of the blank check era. They are forcing Silicon Valley risk models onto defense contractors. They are no longer willing to underwrite corporate inefficiency or technological delays.
Which provides a fascinating contrast when we look at the legacy titans, L3 Harris, ticker LHX, and Northrop Grumman, ticker NOC. We call these the structural primes.
Structural primes, because their success is almost structurally mandated by the basic needs of the U.S. military. The government literally cannot afford to let them fail.
Let's analyze L3 Harris first. They have actively branded themselves the Arsenal of Freedom.
And they have the government backing to prove it. L3 Harris recently received a massive $1 billion direct investment from the U.S. government
Why did they get that?
because the U.S. military looked at their inventory and realized they literally ran out of rockets. They ran out of the solid rocket motors that propel everything from defensive interceptor missiles to offensive strike weapons. The industrial base had consolidated too much, and production couldn't keep up with the demands of global conflicts.
So the government didn't just order more rockets. They gave L3 Harris $1 billion with a single structural mandate: triple your solid rocket motor production capacity, open up 60 new buildings, implement AI and robotics on the factory floor, and just build industrial capacity. The government is acting less like a customer buying a product and more like a venture capitalist directly funding national industrial infrastructure.
But while they are taking $1 billion to build heavy rocket motors, L3 Harris is also executing a brilliant financial restructuring. They are spinning off their missile solutions business, the very business building those rockets, into a separate IPO.
That sounds counterintuitive. Why would you do that? Why break apart the company right when the government is handing you $1 billion to expand that exact segment?
It is all about unlocking hidden shareholder value. L3 Harris management realized that they had two fundamentally incompatible business models living under the same corporate roof.
How so?
On one side, you have the rocket business missile solutions. This is heavy, loud, low-margin metal-bending manufacturing. It requires massive factories, giant chemical mixers for the solid fuel, and huge capital expenditures. It's a vital business, but it's a slow-growth industrial business.
Right. And the other side?
On the other side, you have their communications and spectrum dominance business. This segment builds software-defined radios, advanced electronic warfare algorithms, and space communication systems. It operates much more like a high-margin tech company, boasting gross margins around 25%.
Ah, so it's a Wall Street valuation game. By spinning off the heavy manufacturing into its own IPO, they decoupled the slow-growth industrial side from the high-growth software side. It allows investors to value the high-tech communications business at a massive premium, pricing it much closer to a Silicon Valley tech stock than a traditional defense contractor burdened by metal-bending factories.
Exactly. And within that high-tech portfolio, they are delivering incredibly agile, attritable solutions that fit the new Pentagon mandate perfectly. The sources highlight a system they built called the Vampire Kit.
The Vampire Kit?
The Vampire Kit is a modular, palletized rocket launching system combined with a highly advanced sensor ball. But the genius is in its deployment. It can be bolted onto the back of a standard commercial pickup truck, like a Toyota Hilux, in a matter of hours.
It instantly transforms a cheap, ubiquitous civilian vehicle into a highly effective, laser-guided drone killer.
Right. It doesn't require a custom armored chassis. It is the absolute epitome of attritable, adaptable defense.
That brings us to Northrop Grumman. If L3 Harris is the Arsenal of Freedom, Northrop Grumman is the digital nervous system of the Pentagon. They have effectively cornered the market on the most difficult, high barrier to entry domains in the world.
Northrop Grumman is moving far beyond simply bending metal. They hold near monopolies on the modernization of the United States nuclear triad. They are the sole builders of the B-21 Raiders stealth bomber, and they are prime on the Sentinel intercontinental ballistic missile program.
The barriers to entry for these programs are insurmountable for any startup or neoprime. You cannot have a venture-backed startup build a stealth bomber that carries nuclear weapons.
And while Northrop might take low margins or even absorb financial losses on the initial production runs of the B-21 bomber, they are playing a 40-year game.
A very long game.
They are locking in the proprietary data rights for the sustainment of the aircraft, the constant software upgrades, and the specialized stealth coatings that will need to be reapplied for the next 4 decades. It is a guaranteed, multi-generational revenue stream.
And they are using cutting-edge techniques to build these systems, specifically relying on something called digital twins.
Tell us about digital twins.
A digital twin is exactly what it sounds like, but the complexity is mind-boggling. It is a perfect, hyper-accurate software simulation of the physical aircraft. Historically, aerospace engineers would design a plane, spend millions to physically build a prototype, stick it in a wind tunnel, find a flaw in the aerodynamics, and then spend months and millions more to physically rebuild it.
But not anymore.
No, Northrop runs thousands of design iterations virtually. Their supercomputers calculate fluid dynamics, thermal stress, and radar cross-sections in software. They find the flaws in the code before they ever put a single piece of titanium.
That drastically accelerates the development timeline. They prove this by designing, building, and flying their autonomous wingman drone, Project Talon, in under 24 months, which is unheard of in aerospace.
But here's where Northrop Grumman truly separates themselves from every other company we've talked about today. Here is their ultimate impenetrable moat.
What's the moat?
Northrop Grumman actually owns and operates their own domestic microelectronics foundries. They manufacture their own highly specialized gallium nitride or CAN microchips, which are the vital components used in advanced radars, electronic warfare pods, and satellites.
In an era where the entire defense industry is absolutely terrified of a supply chain shock from Asia if an embargo hits or shipping lanes are closed, Northrop Grumman is completely insulated.
Yes.
While the small drone startups are scrambling to find non-Chinese flight controllers, Northrop is simply printing their own silicon in the United States. In a digital war, that chip foundry is arguably as vital a strategic asset as the stealth bomber itself.
Which provides the perfect lens to look at our final topic, the Crucible, Phase 2, and the China ban.
So what does this all mean for the future? We talked earlier about the incredible success of companies like Skycutter winning Phase 1, hitting that $5,000 price point and scoring a 99.3. But their victory lap is going to be incredibly short.
Very short.
Because the Department of War has issued a brutal supply chain ultimatum for Phase 2 of the Gauntlet, which kicks off in August 2026.
The Phase 2 Gauntlet introduces a strict, non-negotiable ban on the use of any motors, batteries, or critical electronic components sourced from what they call covered countries. In the context of the commercial drone industry, covered countries almost exclusively means China.
This is a massive existential hurdle for the Phase I winners. Think about the contradiction here. The Pentagon says we want a highly capable, autonomous, lethal drone, and we want you to compress the cost down to $2,000.
And how did these startups likely achieve that cheap price in Phase 1?
By utilizing incredibly cheap, mass-produced, readily available Chinese brushless motors, lithium batteries, and flight controllers. Now, the Pentagon is saying you can't use the cheapest parts in the world anymore, but you still have to hit the $2,000 price point.
And look at the timeline, August 2026. These companies have just 5 months.
5 months.
5 months to completely rip out the guts of their drones, find American or allied suppliers who can actually build those physical components at scale, re-engineer their entire software architecture to interface with the new hardware, and prove that the newly designed NDAA-compliant drone is just as reliable as the old one.
If they cannot execute that complete architectural pivot by August, they lose their eligibility for the program entirely. The door slams shut on a multi-billion-dollar market.
And as if completely rebuilding their supply chain in 5 months wasn't difficult enough, the August Gauntlet isn't just a flight test. It is going to subject these newly redesigned drones to a horrific electronic warfare test.
Right. The sources detail that Phase 2 will feature severe GPS denial and intense communications jamming.
It's not just flying a drone in a straight line on a sunny day in Georgia. The military is bringing in the Joint Interagency Task Force 401, JIATF 401.
This is the very unit tasked with defending the homeland from drone incursions.
Yes, and their explicit job during Gauntlet 2 will be to actively try to destroy the competitors' drones. They will be using active jamming to sever the link between the operator and the drone, spoofing GPS signals to make the drone think it's upside down, and using directed energy and nets to shoot them out of the sky.
It is a literal force-on-force crucible. Surviving this invisible electromagnetic meat grinder is the only way to claim those massive 50,000-unit contracts.
It is a deliberate, high-pressure tactic to force the rapid maturation of the American defense industrial base. The Pentagon is using the promise of a massive guaranteed market to forge a secure domestic supply chain through sheer, brutal, competitive pressure. They are weeding out the...
So, to summarize the immense amount of ground we've covered today, the defense landscape has fundamentally and irreversibly transformed. We have moved away from a bespoke hardware industry that spent decades perfecting multi-million-dollar, exquisite platforms like the aircraft carrier.
We are now rapidly entering an industrialized, software-defined ecosystem driven by expendable, attritable mass.
The military is demanding software speed, massive manufacturing volume, and absolute supply chain security. The companies that thrive will be the ones that can mass-produce lethality, like a Toyota factory, bridging the gap between Silicon Valley agility and heavy industrial manufacturing.
The economic asymmetry of the cost curve war demanded this shift. The era of firing a $2 million interceptor missile at a $20,000 drone is over. The new metric of success is affordability at massive scale.
And that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to mull over as you digest all of the data, the financial moves, and the military doctrine we've discussed today.
Go ahead.
We've talked extensively about the Pentagon's goal to ruthlessly compress the cost of these highly capable, autonomous, lethal drones down to just $2,000 a unit. If they are successful, if American industry manages to mass-produce a decisive battlefield weapon capable of autonomous targeting and navigating through jammed airspace for the price of a used laptop, it absolutely guarantees that this exact same technology will inevitably proliferate globally.
Yes, it will.
When a decisive battlefield weapon becomes as cheap and accessible as a consumer electronics device, when it becomes as cheap as a used laptop, how does a nation, any nation, defend its borders, its civilian stadiums, and its critical infrastructure against non-state actors, cartels, or even highly motivated individuals who can suddenly afford to field their own expendable air force?
That is the ultimate question.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the future of the defense industrial base. Stay curious, keep analyzing the data, and we'll see you next time.